I'm so happy to have with us today Suzie Serene, a realtor with Serene Team Homes, as well as a certified seniors real estate specialist and a certified probate real estate specialist. That's a mouthful, but you keep busy. So
yes, indeed.
Thank you so much for joining me and for giving us a little bit of your time.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, as you know, we work with family caregivers, the unpaid family caregivers, and oftentimes they are juggling so many things. They're juggling the health of their loved one, they're juggling the finances of the situation of Alzheimer's, they're juggling all kinds of things, but inevitably there comes a time when they need to make a change. Sometimes that change is downsizing and moving in with a child. Sometimes that's moving into a senior community. Sometimes that's moving into memory care. It depends. But inevitably, things change.
Right.
So if someone were to age in place at home, the caregiver still at some point in time, because most of the caregivers are older adults,
right,
are going to deal with a change in location, a move.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I really wanted to talk to you, because I think as families and as caregivers, when we're dealing with a dementia diagnosis, we are all consumed with our loved one, our parent, our spouse who has the disease.
Yes.
That we don't think about some of the other things that we need to know about and we need to plan for until it's too late. And then we're putting out fires and we're trying to do all of these hard things when we're exhausted. And, I think it's just a great conversation to have because you see it from the other side, right? Yeah. So I love the fact that you work with seniors, and so you have done a lot, helped a lot of families move their parents, move themselves or their spouse. And I just want to talk a little bit and dive a little bit deeper into what myself, if I was a caregiver or an adult child, what should we be thinking about now, or if we're in the process of it and our parents need to move, or a loved one passed away and we need to liquidate the house that they lived in. It's a big job,
It can be overwhelming. Yeah.
It can be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, just talk to me just briefly about a senior real estate specialist. What does that mean?
Well, I've been specially trained to work with seniors and understand a lot of the ins and outs of that demographic. And, there's a lot of things, if you just think about even just the Alzheimer's dementia component, right? There's the needs change.
Right.
It's different than working with a family with small children, for example. So I understand a lot about the seniors and their unique needs. And also my way of being around them is a little different than some of my, my other folks.
Right. So the needs are different in many ways, right? But I think when you're dealing with dementia, sometimes the move isn't simply, we're going to downsize. We're going to downsize, and one of my parents, Alzheimer's has progressed so much that they're going to have to go into full-time care.
Yes.
But my other parent doesn't require full-time care. So there's a lot of different dynamics that are going to, it's not simply helping them sell their house.
No, it goes far beyond that. So, for example, when I come across an adult child of that sort of situation, I can connect them with wonderful service providers who can help them find where's going to be a great fit for the next place. I have a great service provider who can help them navigate that difficult and challenging
experience. That's a senior living advisor.
Senior living advisor.
We've talked about that, and
so I can help connect people to someone like that's what I often do, which is a situation I had right before I came here today. So, and when dealing with memory loss, we've also got to keep in mind that whole dynamic and making sure that we have the right support around that. So in addition to that, we want to think about these homes, right? Because oftentimes these parents have been in their home for 20, 30, 40 years. There's a lot of stuff in there we know they're not taking with them. And so we think about how to how to help them deal with that, because often the family just gets absolutely frozen in complete overwhelm because there's so much to do, and where do you start? And so what I do is I help with the strategic connections to find people, like a great professional organizer that I work with. I'll tell you, that has been so incredible. So I have this, another person I worked with about 1.5 years ago. The value of this professional organizer, sometimes people don't understand that, but what'll happen is this team will come in after the children have taken whatever of the things they want, and sometimes find treasures that the grown children had no idea were there. For example, this is just the most amazing story. So we had a daughter come here from California to help go through her mother's home, and the daughter was just going to let the mother's friends come in and take whatever they wanted, and was just like, let's get rid of the stuff. One of the professional organizers happened to find something in a closet upstairs. It was an old tea set. It turned out to be a collectible Tiffany tea set, and they were able to sell that at auction for $150,000.
So,
without that
I know this story
Yes.
because I heard the story from the same organizing professional, and she was actually we had one of these conversations, and she brought that up.
So it's so key to have the right support system, and you know, we want to take the load. So for me, I take the load off the shoulders of the family and just help them figure out what's next. You know, hold their hand in what's next, and connect them with the right support people to get them through to the next step, because they've got enough on their plate.
That's the biggest thing, right? As a caregiver, you have so much on your plate. So if you make the decision, whether it's by choice or by necessity in your situation, that you want to sell your home, that is a whole nother hugely stressful task that you're taking, in addition to caring for your loved one, caring for yourself,
life, right?
You know, trying to care for yourself. So, you know, there's obvious financial requirements. So if you're talking about a parent who has dementia, you know, and you want to sell the house, you know, there's obviously, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but, you know, they need to know that they have to have some kind of power of attorney, or, you know, they have to have permission. An adult child can't just say, oh, my father isn't doing well, I'm going to sell his house. It doesn't work like that, right? So there are some legal and financial things that have to go into, you know, to be taken care of before they can do it. But let's kind of start at the very beginning, and let's just for the purpose of this conversation, let's assume that we're adult children and our parents live in a different geographic location.
Right.
And I say that because we have a lot of that. Like, we hear a lot of that. Parents retire in Florida. You know, they go to Florida, they retire, they're doing great, and then mom or dad is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and everything kind of blows up, right? So as an adult child, whether I have a healthy parent in the home with my parent with dementia, or whether, you know, we didn't even know that dementia was that bad. You know, when dementia comes into play, you know, obviously they're going to have to make sure that they have the right legal documentation to be able to sell the house. But what is your, you know, greatest advice to families, adult children, on what's first? Like, where do you start?
Well, if you know the house, so we're assuming they know the house needs to be sold, right? So what I would say is to seek out a trusted realtor who has been doing this for a long time.
Not just selling real estate, but working with older adults and the transitions that are needed with older adults.
Exactly. So if you can find a seniors real estate specialist, one who's been around the block for a while, because they will likely have great connections, like I do here, for all the support that you're going to need along the way, because it's a hard, lonely road, you know, when you're in that situation as this adult child. And finding someone who is really well connected in the community, in the senior community, in the senior care community, is going to be really key, because not only can they help with all the things that need to be done to the house, but they can also make the connections, you know, give you the support that you need, whether it be, you know, to find a great attorney to create the powers of attorney. With a house, often you need a specific power of attorney for the house, as opposed to the general one you may already have. But yeah, so I would seek out that kind of person.
Yeah, that's important. And because you're dealing with so many different layers, like you said, so you've got to find someone who can sell the house and price the house, and then you have to clean out the house. But another thing that needs to happen is that house has to be maintained in the meantime.
Yes.
Right? And so if someone were to call you as a senior real estate specialist, you would also be able to provide them resources to keep the yard kept if that's not something they were already having done.
Absolutely.
To make sure that, you have a reputable contractor if any work needs to be done on the house. Because especially adult children that are living far away, I don't know that area. Like where my parents lived, I don't know that area. I'm going to have to call, Google it, and to find someone.
And you never know if you go to an Angie's List or something like that. You don't know if they just paid to be in that top spot. Right. And so, another key part of the equation is to find, if you can find a key person to help you navigate all of that, then that key person is likely to have relationships with all of them, and they work it together as a team. And so the team approach really is very powerful in getting things moving forward to get you to your end result. Another thing to be, thinking of, mindful of, is when there's a vacant property, there's special needs there's special things needed for insurance, different kind of insurance that you need as opposed to when someone's living there. You may want to have locks rekeyed, for example, to make sure that people, that you don't get squatters in the house. There's just all sorts of things that you don't even think about when you're in that stressful situation.
Right. So you make a really good point about, a vacant home. A vacant home, there's a couple of things, right? So a home, if you're going to leave it vacant, well, perhaps it's going to be a couple of months before you can, say they're in Florida, it's going to be a couple of months before you can get down there. So you'll leave it vacant. But your insurance, your homeowner's insurance, is very different for a vacant, empty home than it is for a home that you're living. Also, isn't it true that there's different insurance needs if you decide to rent the property while you're waiting to sell it?
Absolutely.
Does that vary by state, or is that like a national thing? Do you know?
I imagine that the specific laws vary by state, but I understand that it is a thing that once a house becomes vacant, you really should reach out to your insurance provider and let them know the house is vacant. After, I don't know maybe it's a per state how many days it can be vacant before it's considered to be vacant.
Right. And I would assume that it's also probably not a bad idea to contact the local, fire department, police department, and let them know that, I'm in Florida or I'm here in Virginia and this is my parents' house and here's our contact information. And, I don't know how receptive they would be.
I'm not sure either.
I know I did that with my dad with his Alzheimer's. I let the local police station know, and I'm just we're not here.
Right.
So if I have to make a phone call because I can't get a hold of my dad and we don't know where he is, I would at least like you to know that there's someone in this address that is suffering from dementia, And then, I know some local jurisdictions and things that they're super interested in that, in knowing that, and others are very busy and they don't know what to, they're like, you can tell me, but I'm not going to record that anywhere, officially record it.
Right.
But you do want extra eyes, if possible, on the property.
Right, and if the parents have been there for a long time, perhaps they have neighbors who, they're good neighbors who will keep an eye on things as well.
Right.
So that's also another thing, is to consider reaching out to those neighbors who can keep an eye out for you on your behalf.
Right.
To be your eyes.
Right. I know my parents had a second home. They had a home at a beach house, and they never insured it as a rental property. It was not ever a rental property. They never rented it. It was just for the family to use. And so that's another, the rental property there. So say your parents have a second home and you're going to change the way you handle that home and maybe turn it into a rental property. It's not quite as simple as, oh, I'm just going to rent it. You need to make sure you contact the insurance company and
and to make sure there are
because it's a liability issue, right?
Yeah, and I would also be checking if there are any legal implications to the way that changes over.
Yes. So if you know what questions to ask, that's the biggest thing.
Right.
Whether we're talking about care of our loved one or services available to our family, or selling a home, you have to know what to ask. We say all the time, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So if you're just thrown into a situation that where, oh, I need to sell my parents' house, and oh, by the way, what if my parents never talk to me about, what if I assume their house is paid off because they've lived there for 40 years?
Right.
But it's not.
And it's important to make sure that the taxes are getting paid.
Right.
And any homeowners associations, and of course the mortgage in addition to that, because we don't want liens to be attached to a property because property taxes didn't get paid. Things like that.
So I'm kind of struggling on the way I want to ask this, but when you're dealing with parents and you're dealing with a parent who's a full-time caregiver, is there a point in time that's a good time to start having these conversations? Like, is it ever too soon to have these conversations?
I think the earlier the better.
Yes.
Because you want them to be mindful, because they're going to see when things start shifting, and to be armed with that knowledge that you have a support system.
Yes.
So that when things start to turn, you know where to go.
Yeah, I mean, we have families that don't know if their parents are enrolled in Medicare. So if you're not from a family that was open about such things, and
right.
Your parents, so many parents, especially the generation of my parents, were very, very private people.
Yes.
So they didn't talk about their finances. They didn't talk about their health. They didn't talk about their struggles.
Mm-hmm.
They were always smiling, and I don't know that my parents never talked to me about that. Was very private. That was their business.
Yes.
So then we have to learn when it came time to sell their house, is there a mortgage? Like, do you pay your property taxes through escrow, or are you responsible once a year? Like, does a tax bill ever come to you? These were questions we're worried about. Again, you worry about the person with dementia so much, and their health and their care.
And then all consuming.
It's all consuming. And then when your healthy parent becomes unhealthy because of the stress from that, I know from my own experience, the last thing I was thinking about was when I was going to have to sell my parents' house. I was like, that is so not on my radar screen right now.
Right.
But having that information in place, not just home expenses and things, but life expense, it would have been really nice for us to have sat down and say, okay, as we're making this plan, and as we're talking about getting powers of attorney and medical directives, and making sure that my parents' wishes are honored in their end of life, let's talk about some of the what we think is less important, but in many ways it's more important. But let's talk about, what are the bills you pay? Like, how do you pay it? Do you have a mortgage on your home? Do you, what's the insurance company? I wouldn't even be able to tell you who insured my parents' house. So how would I know if the bill is paid if I don't even know the company?
Right, those are all valid things. Also, insurance policy, but life insurance policies and things like that. It would be very wise to share those early enough on to the trusted family.
Yes, it's just a lot, and it's so much, and it's overwhelming. I think it's overwhelming to keep on bringing up things that a caregiver needs to think about, because I think, oh my gosh, we're just giving them one more thing to think about. But the things that we're trying to bring to their attention are the things that are going to make their life easier down the road when it gets harder, because they addressed it early.
Exactly, because it just doesn't make sense to wait until there's an absolute crisis, because the stress level's just going to go way up, and all that stuff's going to be harder if you haven't really laid out a plan.
Right. Do you have any advice on when there's a little bit of differences of opinion within a family? I think mostly about, a realtor will price a home, and 3 of the children are happy with that, and 1 of the children is like, oh no, that's not enough. And, there's just there can be a lot of drama.
Right.
Do you have any advice to families and adult children on how to mediate some of the stress and come together?
I've seen that before, and it can be really challenging when one person digs their heels in, and often they're not coming from that position because they're educated on what the market's doing or whatever. So I would say the real estate professional can do their best to sit down with them and demonstrate to them why, show them what's been going on in the neighborhood, what's on the market now, what has sold recently, and looking, taking into consideration the condition of the property and all of that. But it's tough when one child, for whatever reason, and there can often be
multiple reasons.
A lot of things,
yes.
right? And so, it's just a tough one. But having a really strong realtor who can demonstrate what their logic and reason is around a particular recommendation is key. Because I know if the three were to go with the one who thought it was higher and they go on the market at that price, statistically we found that most often houses will actually sell for less than if they had put it on the market at the correct price in the first place.
Right.
And so that's the worst thing you can do. So it's, that's a really important key, and why you want a really strong, experienced realtor to help you with that.
Right, and ask the questions, right? Ask the questions. So when you're talking about pricing, your parents' home, you make sure that you understand where that price came from.
Yes.
And you'll find out it came from, comparables in the neighborhood. It came from the most recent homes that have sold. It came from the condition of the house. And a good realtor will kind of outline all of that so that they understand, your recommendation on pricing.
Yes.
On pricing. And then, do you ever work with families, adult children that are like remote? Like, do you?
Yes.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
And do they have to be present, or can they do almost everything remotely?
They can do almost everything remotely. I mean, now we have technology to work in our favor. We have, live calls where we can walk around and see things. Oftentimes, the family member will come here at least once, and then, of course, have to go back to run their own lives. And so, yes. And so again, having a strong person here to help them, or wherever that is.
Right.
Just to help them with that, with strong connections, and a lot of great communication is so key with that. But yeah, we can absolutely handle things remote. Documents can often be signed remotely as well, with powers of attorney and such.
Okay, good. I think it's important to know that it doesn't have to be all consuming, right?
It doesn't.
Because when you hire the right professional, they take the burden off.
Exactly.
We like to take the burden off of the caregiver by educating them and providing them resources. And by doing that, they can enjoy their family,
Exactly.
and they can try to take better care of their health. So, selling a home is it's stressful at any time. Moving is kind of stressful. Showing a home is kind of stressful, especially if you're dealing with someone with cognitive impairments who might still be living in the home.
Absolutely.
So that's a whole nother kind of layer that they need to pull away and decide with their professional, with their realtor, on what's the best way to show the house. Can we, how do we do that so that it's not too disruptive?
Yes.
And by you working with seniors, you know this, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's nothing new for you, where I think some people, that's the value of working with someone who has experience in working with older adults and working with people with dementia. Yeah.
Then we want to make sure they stay safe in their home as long as they're in their home, and we have to be mindful of what that's going to look like. So
Right.
It definitely takes different strategies.
So I know you mentioned earlier that you do work with professionals, which like a senior living advisor.
Yes.
We have had a conversation with a senior living advisor, and they take the role of helping you find a community that will best serve both yourself and your loved one with dementia. But you also are very familiar, because you work with seniors, you're very familiar with all the communities too, right?
Yes, I am.
So, you can kind of give them, you can
feedback.
You can work together and you can provide feedback, and they can come to you, especially again if they're out of state, because we hope that we're working with someone that's going to be honest with us. But you have helped so many older adults move into senior communities yourself, right?
Yes.
And then another thing that I find really great about what you do is when you work with movers. So you don't, if you were going to recommend a mover and work with the movers, you wouldn't just say, XYZ moving company is in this area, because you know that there's ways to move seniors.
Yeah, I actually am connected with one particular mover who they get real familiar with the current living, how the senior currently lives, and helps to move them into their new place. And for example, they'll arrange the medicine cabinet just as it was before, which is real important, of course, as
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
when we're dealing with memory impairment. And arranges the kitchen just so that it's familiar with them when they get to the new place, because the transition is hard enough. And so we want to make sure that we connect them with the kind of caregivers who care.
Yes, yes. And that's and I'm familiar with them, which is
Right.
why we're having this conversation.
Yes.
So this particular moving company will photograph the medicine cabinet, open up the kitchen and photograph the closets.
Yeah.
So that when the family gets to the other side, in their new surroundings, they can set it up as close to the way as it was before.
Right.
That's not something, most movers are going to talk to you about how many square feet is your house, and
how much is it going to weigh?
How much is it going to weigh, and how far does it have to go?
Yes.
And do you need us to pack it and unpack it, or are we just picking up and delivering, right?
Exactly.
That's what people think about, but I want families to know that, there's so many more options, and there's moving companies out there that understand the difficulty of moving as an older adult,
Right.
and moving as an older adult with someone who might have a cognitive impairment.
Right.
So the burden off of the caregiver, it's another burden off of the caregiver, because
Right.
they're helping mitigate that.
Absolutely.
And then I'm just going to assume, but you can correct me, that you would also be able to connect them with a handyman that understands
Yes.
how to work on their new house to make it accessible, or
Yep.
an occupational therapist who comes in and says, we would like to see this move down and things like that.
Absolutely.
You can help them with that.
Yeah.
So that's not what people normally think about,
No.
and I need people to really hear this and understand that, there's professionals out there, real estate professionals, moving professionals, organizing professionals, that it's really like you have spent a great deal of time and energy to educate yourself and get certified in this
Yes.
arena,
Yes.
so that you can, be a resource to them that they otherwise might not have had.
Exactly.
So it's huge. It's huge. So this is kind of a rabbit hole, I'm just going to warn you.
Okay.
The rabbit hole about kids who are trying to, they want to do things, they want their parents to do things, but their parents aren't ready. Do you encounter that when it comes to moving, like trying to maybe get their parents to move, but the parents aren't ready?
That's a tough one. Yeah, every now and then, and often they just. That's a rabbit hole.
It just happens,
And it's really an individual kind of scenario. I mean, eventually, I think a parent will recognize that they need the change, and it's almost until that point they often will just dig their heels in.
Yes, I think where I was going with this, or the direction that I wanted to go with this, is just to understand that, you can have this conversation all day with your parent or your spouse or your sibling, but sometimes it's worth a call to a professional, even if it means that you don't start the process quite yet. But you're able to kind of be a neutral ground and say, you know what, I am here for you. I'm not sure that this is quite the best time, but you can kind of advise them on some steps they need to take to get themselves ready when it is time.
And to be a resource along the way for anything they need from today until they're ready.
Yes. Yes, I think those are the things that we don't take time to ask, the questions we don't ask, because we're just so overwhelmed.
Right.
There's too many things happening at one time, and in the case of my family, my brother is very like, okay, we need to do this, and this. And I'm like, we need to do this, but we need to check with mom, and
Right.
and so, having a neutral party that can kind of say to us, okay, let's slow your roll a little bit, and if this is what you're going to do, let's let's try to put this in place, and let's sit down and have a meeting with your parents, and let's make them, help them understand what their home might be worth today, how long we think it might be on the market, because that changes, and that's you're an expert on this.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I should know if we're going to sell our parents' house and we're living in an area where houses are sitting on the market for 3 months, or
It's a very valid thing
Yes.
to understand what's going on in the market, and that's where a great real estate professional comes in.
Yes, of course. So what am I missing? Am I missing anything? Like, any advice you'd like to give to families who are, this is in their future, like it or not,
Well, just, when you can find someone that you can trust to help guide you through that process, just the knowing that it's going to take a lot of the stress off your shoulders, because it can be overwhelming. And whether it's the caregiver or the adult children, it's just overwhelming. And just so much value in having someone else come in to help lift that stress, lift that weight of the overwhelm.
I agree. And I think for them to be open and not be shy about, and there's no such thing as a dumb question, right?
Not at all.
So just write down the questions and just ask you the questions, because they may be very surprised at the answer.
Right. It might be easier than they
It might be
thought.
easier than they thought.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, Suzie, I will share your information, your contact information, let people know how to get in touch with you. But I also know that as a certified senior real estate
Real estate specialist.
real estate specialist, I don't know why I can't get that right. I know that you have a network across the country.
Exactly.
So you happen to be in the Northern Virginia area, but if we have a family who's listening who's in another part of the country, they can still reach out to you, and you can help connect them, and that's huge.
I would be honored to help, and I do have a tremendous network all across the United States and beyond. And when I connect someone like that, I'm talking to the family to understand their unique needs wherever they are. And when I connect them with someone, I've also interviewed that person on behalf of them first to make sure they're going to be a good fit, to make sure they understand the area and they understand, they have the connections that need to be made, so that's one less thing they have to worry about.
That's amazing. I mean, it's amazing, and it's just another thing to take the burden off of the caregiver.
Yeah.
And the adult children who are playing a role in the same thing. So, moving is, what do they say, the most stressful thing?
It's in the top 10 of life's most stressful events, especially for seniors. So, and then when you've got the dynamics of family that live in different places, and they've got their own lives and their own jobs and their own children, and they're trying to get it all done when they're not local, that just adds stress, kind of across the board. Yeah.
So I can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise.
Yes.
And we will, like I said, provide a link to your website and your information, and we will pass along anything else that you might like to pass along.
Sounds perfect.
And I thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.